Dr. Macintosh has been at the best college in Cambridge for decades. He has been the chaplain of the college. He has been the Hebrew teacher at the college. He has been a tutor at the college. He has been a dean at the college. He has been the president at the college. We think he was the soccer coach at one point in time. We're not positive about that, but Chris and I were saying he might have been. I think he was at least field marshal for life. He has carried every title over 4 decades. This man's mind is as sharp as any I've ever met. This man's dexterity with the language is as sharp as anybody I've ever met. This man's heart for God is as convicted as anyone I've ever met. And yet, he cares about people. And that's why he's here. He wants to tell you some things. He cares about you, and he cares about the Lord, and he's figured out how to mesh a life of worship with a life of study. Would you please join me and give a hearty Texas welcome to Dr. Andrew Macintosh.
It is a great pleasure and honor to return to the LTL. To its founder, Mark Lanier, I have on a previous occasion referred in respect to his large vision and munificent generosity in establishing this great institution. I see him as a se'ora, as a whirlwind of energy, focused on the great Isaianic goal that the knowledge of the Lord should cover the earth as the waters cover the sea, a not inconsiderable task even for a whirlwind. The book of Proverbs asks the question, Eshet Chayil mi yimsa, who can find a resourceful wife? The implication being it's jolly difficult to find one. But it has not been difficult for the whirlwind, and his Becky has greatly supported him with some really important ideas. I will not omit the superb support staff in this library, notably Charles Mickey, Ish Tamlev, a man of great integrity, and his wonderful assistant, Jenny Enright. There is also something to do with bees here called Janet Suforth, and I'm going to say of her, Mamatok Medavash, what is sweeter than honey? So that was what Samson said, you will remember. So what a great team they make, and it's a joy to be here because they make it all possible for us. Now, here we go then. This is the lecture proper. I want first to say we omitted in the bibliography at the end an important new work on Hosea by a person who's here tonight, and that is Eric Tully, who has written a commentary on Hosea. It's a linguistic one. It doesn't deal with the more general problems, but it's very useful and helpful. I reviewed it for the Journal of Semitic Studies. It's a very useful way of getting into the Hebrew of the book. Now, you've got a map in your handouts, so we want to have that ready for you now. Hosea was born about 750 BC, and he lasted till the fall of Samaria in 722 BC. He was the son of Beeri, and none of my pupils ever forget that he was the son of Beeri, and that Ezekiel was the son of Boozy. They never forget that. So he was the first Hosea was the first writing prophet. And the great writing prophets followed: Isaiah, Jeremiah, Ezekiel. Before that we had prophets, but people wrote about them. From this time on, he was doing the writing. Now I'm got to go through with you a little bit of the historical background. In 1000 BC, we have the United Kingdom and large empire of King David, with Jerusalem at its capital. He was very smart in placing his capital in Jerusalem, which was already there as a tiny little town, right on the north of the southern kingdom of Judah, you see on your maps. It was a clever place to put it because it meant he united the northern elements and the southern elements. Do I hear a little contemporary echo in this country, north and south? Don't worry, the goodies are the southerners in this story. The northern tribal the northern kingdom was called Ephraim, after Joseph's son of that name, or else Israel. The southern kingdom was called Judah, and these split apart from the united kingdom of David. And then on there was not war between them, but there was troubles. We had overall two great nations, two big powers, world powers. One was Assyria in Iraq, in modern Iraq. Assyria, not Syria, Assyria in Iraq, and Egypt in the south. And these little kingdoms in Palestine, Israel, were vying for the attention of the big countries, just like many people know my son works in the Middle East as a military. The countries there are always trying to get in with Russia or in with America and the West. You know, there's a little tension there that goes on all the time. So that's what we're having. There was a scrap between Ephraim in the north, Hosea's country, and the south in the middle of Hosea's time, because the northern people, the Ephraim, attacked the south with the help of Syria, not Assyria, it was Syria, the same one that we've got today. They attacked, and you know from your Isaiah, the great Emmanuel prophecy comes from that time. And Hosea refers to it in chapter 5 of his work. The economic situation in Hosea's time had been very favorable, particularly for the well-off, and the rich became richer and the poor became poorer. Hosea's contemporary prophet Amos was also prophesying in the north. He was a southerner who went north to tell the north how to behave. Does that sound good? And he told them how to behave. He was a great indictment of them for treating the poor terribly. You could buy a slave for the price of a pair of shoes, he says. And fathers, and there's awful immorality, fathers and sons using the same prostitutes, specifically called holy women. Now that's going to take us a bit of thinking about. And there was debauchery in the worship of Baal, or God equals Baal, at the many hilltop sanctuaries. Now that's the laundry list complete, which is not so interesting, but we need to know it. Now we need to do a bit of grammar now. Some common nouns become proper nouns or names, and we can illustrate that in English. God with a lowercase g. Thor, I'll say Thor is a god of the Saxon times. Little case g. But when a child is learning to pray, the child says, "Oh God, bless mummy and daddy and make me a good little boy." That's a capital G, because the word God, which is a common noun, becomes a proper noun, becomes a name. Well, exactly the same came about with the God who was operating with lowercase g, God who was operating in the north, who was called Baal. But Baal becomes Baal with a big B, because people were praying to him. Oh, Baal, save us. Oh, Baal, intervene for us. So we've got to remember that the title he had, which means a master, an owner. It's rather a harsh description, a rather harsh one. Owner, master, lord. You trembled when you thought about him. On the contrary, the God who brought Israel out of Egypt was called the Lord Yahweh. Different word for Lord. You may have heard it, Adonai. Adonai, my Lord. If you sung him at Advent, O come, Emmanuel, the last verse runs, O come, Adonai. That's the word. That's reserved for the God we worship, the God who brought them out of Egypt. Now we have to consider the matter of syncretism, which is the attraction of one religion to another religion. Usually an earlier one a later one attracts to an earlier one. And we've got some examples of that. The syncretisms of the coalition of religions can be good, can be bad, and can be indifferent. Now, you speak about the days of the week. You say Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. All those are the names of Anglo-Saxon, North Germanic gods. Woden is a god of war, and Thor, Thursday, is a god of thunder. Donnerstag in German. So these are pagan gods, but we don't worry about it, do we? It doesn't, because we say, I'll see you on Thursday, not worshipping Thor by saying it's immaterial, it doesn't matter, it's just a hangover from the past. So I would call that that is a syncretism, but it's an indifferent one, doesn't matter. Now, let's look at a really beautiful syncretism. We have no evidence whatsoever that Jesus was born on the 25th of December. But the church had a gospel, and the gospel said, in the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was the light, he was the life, and the life was the light of men. And the light came into the darkness, and the darkness comprehended it not, couldn't overcome it. The light shone in the darkness. Now that is an experience, particularly in Northern Europe, which you all experience in December, where the shortest day of the week is the 21st of December, where it's dark. In England, it's really dark by 3:30 in the afternoon, and it doesn't get light till after 8 o'clock in the morning. Up in Norway, you have a whole month of complete darkness, no sun at all. Now, the church put together those two elements, the gospel of the light shining in the darkness and the coming of Jesus and in the climate. And so some Christians have made the habit of celebrating the Lord's birth in the middle of the darkest night, the so-called midnight mass. Right in the middle of the darkest night, they witness to the shining of the light in the darkness, and they help the light to go on shining with people. Now that's a wonderful, beautiful syncretism. So syncretism isn't all bad, but there are bad syncretisms. Now, there was a bad syncretism in the northern kingdom, which you've seen on your map, in the northern kingdom of Ephraim and Israel. The northern kingdom had this god Baal. And the question was, they were very, very grateful for the Lord, Yahweh, the Lord our God, for bringing them out of Egypt. They really were. It was very, very important to them. But they had a new situation in the north because it was very agricultural there. Now, is the God who helped us knock the Egyptians off their horses and drown them and saved us from slavery, is he any good with the turnips? Can he grow the cabbages? It's a different world. So they started to say, well, let's have a bit of help from the local God, because he's very good. He really knows his gardens very well. And they also said, maybe he did. The gardening could go with saving us from the Exodus. So that is a syncretism, and we have got proof of that particular. Whereas in the southern kingdom, there's a different God who was there before the Jews, and his name was El, Aleph Lamed, same as Arabic Allah. This God was a God of justice and equity, and he was a top God. He was the chairman. He was the moderator of the gods. He was very keen on correctness, righteousness, and he was going to meet the God of the Jews and the southerners who were brought out of Egypt. And that was a perfectly good and acceptable syncretism. In fact, Abraham goes to visit the king of Jerusalem before the Jews got there, called Melchizedek. And as he arrived, he said, Melchizedek said, "Lovely to see you, Abraham. Very pleased to see you. Blessed be you by El, our God El." And Abraham said, "Oh, thank you very much. That's very gracious of you. Blessed be you, Melchizedek, by El Elyon Yahweh." Yahweh, Lord. So he made a syncretism. There's a syncretism in he equated the Lord of the Exodus with the God of Jerusalem. And that was perfect, because the God of the Exodus was very much a God of justice for slaves. A perfect syncretism. So there we have a different business from north and south. And we have further evidence. On your handout, I've said we have a name of a person found in an inscription in Beit Shemesh, which is on the borders between the north and the south. We have Baal Yahu, that is to say, Yahweh, the Lord Yahweh is Baal. So they've identified in that inscription, they've absolutely identified our Lord, our God, with Baal. And that is a no-no, and the prophets don't like that. That's very dangerous. And then we have a little verse from Hosea which confirms that. On that day, says God, you will no longer call me, that is to say the God of the Exodus, you will no longer call me Baal, Baali, but Ishi, a different word for husband. You'll no longer call me Baali, you'll call me Ishi. So there's proof from the text that they were calling our God Baali. Syncretism, bad syncretism. Now this god Baal was very pops up all over the place. He pops up in North Africa. The great adversary of the Romans was called Hannibal, who took elephants over and tried to attack Rome. Do you remember? Hannibal means, Hanni is the same as Anne, grace, our name Anne. Hannibal means the grace of Baal. So he popped along the shore of North Africa, quite a long way to Carthage. That's one. Then we have a great temple which some tourists of you, amongst you may have visited in Lebanon called Baalbek. There's the name again, a name of a great ruin there, a temple of Jupiter there called Baalbek to this day. Then our Lord Jesus Christ is accused of casting out devils in the name of the Prince of Devils. And what was the name of the Prince of Devils? Beelzebub. Beelzebub. Now, that's quite interesting because there was a Baal of Zebul, which means the height. But the scribes changed it because so they didn't call him Beelzebul, they called him Beelzebub. And Zebub means dung flies. So they were casting their scorn on the name by doing that. So that's the New Testament. Then in modern Arabic, Baal, the same word, Baal, means a land watered by rainfall. Now that's going to be very important to us. It means a land watered by rainfall, like Texas, like England. Where is it not watered by rainfall? The answer, Egypt, because it doesn't rain in Egypt, or very, very rarely. So how do you get water in Egypt? You have to do it by irrigation. You've got canals, you make little canals from the Nile, and people shuffle along the canal with their feet pushing the water along towards the cucumbers and the potatoes and all that. So that is a land which is not Baal. Egypt is not Baal. Very, very interesting that the word of the God who's very good with the turnips and all that is found to this day to mean a land watered by rainfall. Then Jerusalem is described by Isaiah as Azuvah, abandoned, left alone, like a woman completely left without a husband by war or whatever. And she will one day, says Isaiah, be called Beulah. Here's the same word, Baal, again. But it's being used in a positive sense. She will no longer be abandoned. She will be consummated. She will become a mother of children. So there it is. The word is all over the place. And right into the 19th century, there's a great Jewish writer in Hebrew in Europe called Baal Shem Tov, which means the possessor, the Baal of a good name. So he was very, very ubiquitous. He's everywhere. So now what about the religion of this Baal? We know about it about Canaanite religion from the tablets found in 1936 by a Syrian farmer's plough. The farmer was ploughing in Syria and the plough got clunked, and he looked down and there were these large number of cuneiform tablets written in the script of Akkadian, of Babylon and Assyria. And these texts told us for the first time of what the Baal religion was all about. We only had the Bible before that. Before that we knew he was very bad and a bad influence. But we got the positive statements from the Canaanites, from these texts from Syria. And this is what seems to have happened. Baal was the god of agricultural growth, as we've seen, and he had a wife. And her wife was called Astarte or Anat. He, Baal, was killed by the god Mot, death. Now what does the killing of death mean, of Baal mean? It means in the agricultural cycle of Israel, Palestine, when the sun gets going from May onwards, nothing really, everything goes dry. No grass, it's just dried out. And that is represented in the mythology by the death of green growth. And the god Death is personified. And if you don't, there are echoes of that in our scriptures, of course. Though I walk through the valley of the shadow of death, there he is, he's there. he, as you may know, that name went right through to the modern world in chess, because if you win a game of chess, you say checkmate, which is a corruption of Shah. The king is mat, dead. So it means the king is dead, so I won the game, do you see? So it goes a long way. So the death of Baal is the death of the green, and he is represented to this day with a scythe. The grim reaper. He's the grim reaper who kills the vegetation and the life. Now, Astarte, his wife, I'm not absolutely sure which of them, goes down into the underworld and rescues Baal. And he has a wonderful, here's a good bit, she gets really tough with death and chops up death into hundreds of little pieces. And she scatters the pieces of death over the fields, representing the broadcast sowing of seed. And when she's done that, she builds a temple, a triumphant temple for Baal. She takes him back to the ordinary world, and she builds a wonderful temple with all hot modern cons, lovely garage, valet parking, everything you could want. And when she's done that, they are married, or they consummate a marriage, and that signifies the coming of the rain, which waters the seeds which have been sown in the ground. That means late October in Israel-Palestine, when the heavy rains come. So the rains then germinate the crops. So it's a rather neat little religion, don't you think? It has its points. It has some really quite interesting insights to understand the science of how farming works in mythological terms. It's very back to nature in other ways. It seems to be very crude in some ways. And when they celebrate the harvest, there's a lot of knees up, as we say in British, meaning party time. There's a lot of knees up. There's lots of drinking and cavorting, and it's a very happy, but rather naughty time. So that's the background. I've painted the background now. So we're coming now to Hosea himself. The book of Hosea may be divided into two parts. The main section contains short sentences, what we call aphorisms, on contemporary historical and political events. And I'm not going to trail through them because it's very complicated and really quite tricky. So we will come back to it, but the main concern now will be to talk about the first 3 chapters, which contain information about Hosea and particularly about his wife and children. The first verse runs, it's very special, this first verse. The beginning of the Lord's speaking to Hosea was, so we can say, the Lord first started to, that's the Lord Yahweh, the Lord of the Exodus, first started to talk to Baal, to his wife, to Hosea, when he said, go marry a promiscuous woman and have children of promiscuity, for the land has turned from the Lord Yahweh in gross promiscuity. One thing alongside the other. We don't think that his wife was promiscuous then. Of course, this is retrospective. He's looking back over his redactor is looking back over his life, and he married a woman who was to become promiscuous. It's called proleptic. There follows an account of the marriage and the birth of the 3 children. The third short chapter seems to have been written by Hosea himself with his own biro. He did it himself. And it witnesses to the same basic command. He is told by the Lord Yahweh to continue to love his wife, by this time unhappy and trapped in a nasty relationship. Just as the Lord Yahweh loves the Israelites while they turn to other gods in orgiastic worship. Just as one thing parallel to the other, the private thing parallel to the national thing. It's a very, very strong connection between the two. What are we to make of this just as? What is the force of the comparison which is so strong for us and for them? Well, for that we have to think about the way prophets spoke and acted. The putting of one thing alongside another can be illustrated by other points. For example, Jeremiah makes a potter's vessel and smashes it in pieces and says, "Thus will Israel be destroyed." A connection between the pot which he's broken and the breaking of the nation. And what happens? The cops come along with screaming sirens, arrest him, put him away. He's a very dangerous man to do that. He's going to bring a curse on the land by doing that. There's a causative connection in the putting of one thing alongside the other. And then I've trotted out for you an even stronger evidence of this thinking in the prophet Elisha telling one of the kings how he is going to defeat the Arameans, the Syrians. And the prophet says, take a bow and shoot an arrow through the window at the direction of Syria. And as he does it, the prophet cries out, the victory of the Lord Yahweh against the Syrians. It's causative, it's magic, it's what we call sympathetic magic. By the small action, you are trying to bring about the big action. Huge. And then even more, he says, what about you bang those arrow on the ground and you'll really defeat them. And what does the king do? He does it 3 times. And the prophet said, darn it, you've ruined it now. You've only done it 3 times. If you'd done it 6 times, we really would have clobbered the Syrians. The causal connection is so strong. Now, how do we understand that? We don't really believe in magic anymore. Though I have to say, if anybody's watched the New Zealand rugby team before their game, they do what they call a haka. They squat down on their haunches and they make the most vile, rude faces, and they make aggressive noises against the poor old Brits who are playing rugby with them. We can take it, but the French can't take it. What do they do? Now, I think you have cheerleaders, but I think they're sweet little girls, aren't they? They don't do anything aggressive about. But it's all psyching people up, isn't it? I think that's what we would understand all this as being. It's psyching people up. It's propaganda. We had a nasty Northern Ireland person in the Second World War, who went to Germany and went on to Hitler's staff, and he used to broadcast to England. I can't remember him, but I heard about him. And he used to speak with a terribly posh accent, frightfully posh. Germany calling, Why don't you give up? You're just fighting against a much more important leader than you, your silly little people. He was doing this propaganda, but he was trying to undermine our morale by doing that, which is very similar to this kind of sympathetic magic. So I'm glad to say at the end of the war he's hung. That shut him up. So we may not worry about sympathetic magic, but we do worry about propaganda. Propaganda is a hugely important part of any warfare. So there we are. That's what. Now, there's a hugely interesting and important modification of this. These prophetic acts of sympathetic magic are about us trying to influence God or gods. What the prophets did, including Amos, was to turn the direction round, so that instead of from men up to God, is God coming down to men, and these actions are regarded as signs of God, of what God wants, not what men want, what God wants. And the signs are a propaganda to get on and do what God wants, and to by influencing people's minds, because that's where God, above all, where God influences us, through our brains. And the signs help God's purposes to be achieved and brought about. So those are some examples of one thing alongside another. We return now to what Hosea did. What was the sign that God told him to portray? It was a marriage. His marriage was to be a sign which showed God's intentions. It was a marriage. It didn't seem very nice because it was to a loose woman. Now, we need to look a bit about marriage then, and I invite you to look at the illustrations you've got in your handout. It was found on a pithos jar, which is a large storage jar in the Sinai desert at a place called Untitled Chapter. On a pithos, these jars, big jars for storing oil, olive oil and corn and wine, they used to keep them in these, and they doodled on them. And here we have on the left a doodle on a pithos jar, radiocarbon, dated to exactly the time of Hosea. Now, what have we got in the picture? These are best figures they call them, and they are draped with lion skins over their shoulders, and then the tails, of course, hang down. And both those figures have the same lion's tails. Now, one looks like Mr., and the other looks like Mrs., because she has breasts. The second one's a smaller one. And he's obviously the big dude, do you call it? He's a big dude. And both of them have faces like we said that the Lord Yahweh was worshipped in the north with bull images. Those are bovine faces, aren't they? Then there's a lyre player at the back who's just playing Top of the Pops for them. Now we come to the Hebrew inscription of the 8th century BC above those figures. And what does it say? It said, "Blessed are you, traveller." I should have said, this is a khan. This is the equivalent of a hotel in the desert. It's where you pull up for the night and put your donkeys and all the rest of it there. And you sleep the night there. It's like the inn on the way from Jerusalem to Jericho was a khan of that kind. So, blessed are you, the traveller, by the Lord Yahweh, by the Lord Yahweh of Samaria, not of Jerusalem, of Samaria, of the north, and his Asherah. And his Asherah. So that looks as if we have evidence from Hosea's time of Mr. God and Mrs. God. As simple as that. That's why I called my lecture Shock. We'll come on to awe later, but this is shocking. This is shocking, isn't it? Now, Asherah is the symbol of the goddess. And if you look on the right of the picture, you see a stylized tree or pole, because the fertile tree was her sign of her, as the bull was for the male god. And there you are, the animals around, and the ones at the top are curved because they were painted on the top of the pithos jar. So that is Untitled Chapter, which has caused a massive stir. It has been written up by an American woman called Judith Hadley, who was one of our students who came over to us in Cambridge and worked on this matter, and her work is in your bibliography. I have to tell you this though, amazing, she was an archaeologist, and she went digging in hell. That is to say, she went digging in a cave in Gehinnom, which is the valley on the southwest side of Jerusalem, which was a very nasty place because they burnt children alive and things there. It was a creepy place, and that's why it became hell, the valley of Hinnom. So she was walking around, fiddling around in a cave, and she found a ring, radiocarboned to the time of Jeremiah. And guess what was on the ring? The Lord bless you and keep you. The Lord lift up the light of his countenance upon you and give you peace. The Aaronic blessing, which we know from the book of Numbers. Here is a bit of the Bible that's come to us from outside the Bible on a ring, a beautiful ring, silver ring. So she found that. That's not relevant to this, but it shows what a great archaeologist she is, and she's written about this, the goddess, in the early times. So Hosea's biggest achievement, perhaps, when you've seen the picture from Untitled Chapter, his great achievement was to modify, to change, to shape this crude belief with a new doctrine that the Lord Yahweh's wife was not a woman with a cow face, but the people of Israel, God's people, were the true wife of the Lord God. It's another just like, exactly the same. The relationship between God and his people is exactly the same as that ideally between Hosea and his wife. Okay, so that's a massive step forward. Now, you've got three children. The first is called Jezreel. And these children have prophetic names. They're another example of signs from top down. Now, Jezreel was the place of the dynasty of Ahab and Jezebel. Jezebel, who painted herself and looked out of the window, you remember. And Jezebel and Ahab were ousted by a kind of military upstart like Bashar al-Assad's father in Syria of modern times. He had nothing but brute force going for him, and anybody got in his way, he just massacred them. And so Jehu massacred the whole remaining dynasty of Ahab and Jezebel in a huge massacre, really, he also murdered all the prophets of Baal. He locked them up in a chapel and the whole lot, massacred them. And this is typical of the behavior of the northern kingdom of Ephraim, Israel. They gave themselves to incessant, bloodthirsty regime changes. For example, in a 20-year period during the time of Hosea, 6 kings ascended to the throne of the north. 6, and 4 of them were assassinated by their successors. It was dreadful, absolutely awful. Now, massacre then is condemned by the Lord Yahweh through Hosea. Condemned, massacre of Baal worshippers. Isn't that a bit odd? Aren't we supposed to think Baal worshippers are baddies? Well, he is condemned for massacring. And it's even more difficult than that, because the Mosaic law of Deuteronomy says when you get into the land of Canaan, what you have to do to avoid any idolatry, when you get there, just conquer the villages of the Canaanites and murder the lot of them. Kill the lot by a sacred process called the ban, the cherem. Same word as harim, actually, meaning separate. There you are, to separate them and annihilate them. So we have a massive internal scriptural conflict there. And I'm on Hosea's side because I don't think that the Mosaic thing ever actually happened like that. It was a counsel of what we must do to avoid idolatry, seen back at a later time. Anyway, now we can, of course, associate ourselves absolutely with, I think, with Hosea in our own last few days. Muslims murdered in Christchurch, New Zealand, in their mosque. And we had Christians killed by terrorists in London who were driving trucks at people. We have Christians massacred in Sri Lanka by maniacs. We've got massacres all around us. And we know we don't need to speak about the Holocaust as the Jews. And I'm afraid even Palestinians have been massacred by Jewish fanatics in 1948. The whole village of Deir Yassin, not far from Jerusalem, was completely machine gunned. They killed 250 men, women, children. It's all over the place, and it's wrong. From there down, it's wrong. It's wrong. And Hosea said it without fear or favor. It is wrong. So that's the first son. And he says the country is in a mess because you behaved like that. Behaved in a bloodthirsty way. The second child is a girl called Lo Ruchama, which means not pitied, not loved, meaning that the slide of the behavior of the whole country is getting worse and worse and worse. More bloodletting, more in the monarchy, and priests of the sanctuaries behaving very badly, and a number of gang rapes, things of that kind. So it's again a huge moral condemnation, which is sapping the very nature of the nation. And the third child shows the end. He is called not my people. You are behaving in such a way that you've surrendered the right to be my people. You're no longer my people. Lo Ami. Very, very tough. And here is the last verse of Hosea from the chapters. Samaria shall bear her guilt because she has rebelled against her God. They shall fall by the sword. Their little ones shall be dashed in pieces, and their pregnant women ripped open. Strong stuff. That was the end of it. Was Lo Ami, not my people anymore. But there's something else about this. It says, I will not be your God anymore, and I will not hire for you. The verb hire. It was translated by the Septuagint as to be, and it doesn't really mean to be, it means to become. But the Greeks translated it to be, and they said it meant I will be what I will be, which doesn't really make much sense. It's very Greek and all about metaphysics and things. But what it means really is I will come alongside. For example, the boy Samuel, the word of the Lord hired to Samuel, meaning the telephone was not ringing, and then it started to ring. That's hire, transition, the beginning of Revelation. And Psalm 124 says, if the Lord had not hired for us, and it repeats it, if the Lord had not hired for us when our enemies attacked us, we would have become toast. Right? That's what Psalm 124 says. The hire, coming alongside. Now look back at the Exodus to Moses at the bush. I will hire you. I will come alongside you and help you in your task to rescue your people. So in that negative statement, we have a wonderful vision of what God is. He is the one who comes alongside us. That's his name. That's how he is. And that's what we can witness and hear, feel in our own lives, that he isn't there, and then he is there. He comes alongside us. So that's that. Now, we don't know much about Hosea's wife. Her name was Gomer, and we know nothing of his children. The name Gomer seems to mean to accomplish, to achieve successful childbirth. She was the daughter of Diblaim, possibly related to figs, and this has led to centuries of chauvinistic comments by men who say, some rabbis suggested that she could be squeezed like a block of figs, and everyone could slake their lust with her. Another meaning of Gomer seems to mean that. The monk Jerome, the great Jerome, really gets going. She was an epitome of seductive sweetness, a consummate fornicator, a perfect daughter of voluptuousness. I think he had problems. All this was too shocking for many commentators. Thus, Rabbi Ibn Ezra in the Middle Ages states that it is quite impossible, utterly impossible, that God should direct a holy prophet to marry a loose woman. Impossible. The great German commentator on Hosea, Wilhelm Rudolph, too, believes that it is totally unthinkable that a prophet would trot out the intimate details of his private life. These views, in my view, seem to be quite wrong. The relationship between Hosea and his wife, as set out, is in the just like sense we have detected, seems to be crystal clear. She was a real person. And since she betrayed Hosea scandalously, she was quite in step with which reflected accurately the scandalous moral collapse of the kingdom, just like. Hosea, though sorely tempted to do so, did not cast stones at his promiscuous wife, because he loved her, like God, the Lord Yahweh, loved his people, however terrible they had been. How can I give you up, O Israel? How can I surrender you? I just can't do it. I can't let you. He loves his wife, and God loves his people just like that. Exactly like that. Now, I think these criticisms of Rudolph, I think, do show us a very important point. We have been let in, we readers today in the near library who read Hosea, we are let into a secret. The whole 10 chapters are about the fall and the collapse of the moral collapse of the northern kingdom of Ephraim. But we readers are let into the secret of what's going on behind that, the just as. What's happening in his private life is exactly what's happening to the state. We are let into the secret. Now that's a magnificent piece of literary dramatic achievement, to be let into the secret. And there's another book which does this trick too, and it's the book of Job, which has the wonderful poems about how awful innocent suffering is. Job was a righteous man, and he suffered every kind of disaster. And he writes these huge, great poems about why does a good God allowed Granny to die of cancer and all this. He's on about this. He takes God by the lapels and he shakes him and says, "Why are you doing this?" Wonderful poems. We are told a little story. Not the general, not Job, not the people around him, but we are told that it all goes up to heaven. Because in heaven, God is, after a nice morning coffee, God says to his staff, he says, we got some wonderful people out there. Have you ever seen anything as good as Job? He's just terrific. He never puts a foot wrong. Marvelous. And his assistant, Satan, by the way, Satan's on God's payroll. He pays taxes, and he gets a M40 every year when he has to fill in his taxes. He's on God's staff. He's not. God, his job is to test people for God. That's his job. And he says, you can boast about Job if you like, but just let me have a go at him, and we'll see if he's really righteous. Now, no, Job isn't told that this is what's going on. And none of them. Just like Hosea, his sermons, his preachings about the nation, the people there didn't know what was going on. But the redactor of his work says, let us into the secret, which is, I think, a massive, wonderful thing that we've got that. Now, it's been said, I'm getting there, it's been said that no other prophet has quite the same total unanimity of thought with God as does Hosea, so that he thinks exactly the same thoughts as God thinks. His wife's adulteries break the prophet's heart and lead him to expressions of snarling anger, just as God reacts to the idolatry and the horror of the nation. I will strip her naked and exhibit her as she was on the day of her birth, and make her like the desert, and let her die of thirst. I will bar her way with thorns and block her path. When she hangers after her lovers, she shall not be able to reach them, and she will conclude, I will return to my husband because things were better then than they are now. So his dream is, though he's furious, love conquers his fury, and he wants her to come back. Huge love for her, wonderful love for her. When all this is about the return to her true husband, just as the nation must return to their true God. Once she has returned to her husband, she will appreciate as earlier she chose not to, that Hosea provided her with her needs of food and clothing. The nation too has been inclined to think that the land of Israel produced the staple agricultural gifts of corn, wine, and oil by the agency of Baal, by the lovers, not by the true husband. So they worshipped with their barbecues, which is what sacrificial meat was, strong drink and fornication with sacred women provided by the sanctuaries. These ideas were wrong and selfish. Now, the last chapter of the book contains a beautiful prayer of Hosea in the light of history. This prayer was not answered, for as we have seen, the Assyrians smashed the northern kingdom and deported its population, who had not been killed. Of Hosea's fate we have no information, and the presumption is that he did not survive the final catastrophe of 722 BC. I find, but there was something that was different. His writings survived. His writings were carried south to Jerusalem and to the southern kingdom. They received them and treasured them because they saw them as warnings that we must not fall into the same traps as the north did. So the writings went south, modified slightly by language, but they went south and became part of the Jewish Bible, and so they ended up in the Lanier Theological Library. Which reminds me of the lovely little Jewish girl of Amsterdam in 1940 who wrote her diary. And she was in an attic, you remember, she was locked up in an attic, hidden from the Nazis. She was in her attic, waiting for you guys and us guys to come and save her. We were, all of us, you were coming at it from the south, we were coming at it from the north. We were on the borders of her country, the borders of Netherlands, when she wrote that diary. But she was betrayed into the hands of the Nazis, and she ended up starved to death, a skeletal corpse, found by our people in the place Bergen-Belsen. Well, not found her personally, but known to have been there, whose job it was, and a cousin of mine actually had to drive, whose job it was to bulldoze thousands of these desiccated corpses, starved to death, into mass graves. That's where she ended up. But her little diary survived and has been read all over the world by countless thousands. Who won that face down? The man with the moustache and his Gestapo and Schutzstaffel, or the little girl with her diary? Who won? I know who won. You know who won. Isn't that wonderful? Well, it's a bit like that with Hosea. His writings survived. So I think that will probably do. We're getting to an hour. There's the last beautiful poem. I must tell you about the last beautiful poem. Hosea dreams that he will be reconciled with his wife, and he dreams that the nation will be reconciled again with her God. And he dreams the dream that Israel will go back to the desert between Egypt and the promised land. She will go back there and she will renew her married relationship with her God. Accordingly, he says, I shall woo her myself and lead her to the desert and speak tenderly to her, speak al-libah on her heart. I will chat her up. I will chat her up tenderly and beautifully and lovingly. I will speak to her heart. And the valley of Achor, which is where the Israelites first came into the land of Israel, shall become Petach Tikvah, the door of hope. Door of hope, the first Israeli settlement in the turn of the century, 18th and 19th century, it was called Petach Tikvah, the door of hope. And Tikvah is the name, hope is the name of the Israeli national anthem. The valley of Achor shall become a door, and there she will be totally attentive to me. She will look at me with dreamy eyes, and she will totally be attentive to me. And she won't call me anymore Baali, my Baal. She'll call me my Ish, my husband, in a wonderful sense. And I can illustrate that with an Arabic saying, with the same word, Alif Nun Sheen. Alif Nun Sheen is used at the end of a letter in Arabic. Yakanu Balabul Ul-Ins fi the Ilahi. It means, instead of yours sincerely, it means, may the nightingales of uns, of human affection, may the nightingales, you say at the end of the letter, may the nightingales of human warmth sing in your garden continually to the praise of Allah. Now, what a way to end a letter, isn't it? Better than yours sincerely, isn't it? Well, that word there, the nightingales of human warmth, that's what don't call me Baali, call me Ishi, human warmth. It's not a top-down heavy marriage. It's a marriage of equals, of beautiful equality. And then I will betroth you to myself forever. I will betroth you to myself with gifts of equity and justice, of kindness and compassion. I will betroth you with gifts of faithfulness, and you will know the Lord. Consummation, the desert, consummation of the marriage. You will know the Lord. And then the land will attend to the corn and the wine and the oil, and they will attend to Jezreel, God's own country, perhaps. Sorry, Texas, you missed it there. God's own country. And the land will produce corn and the wine and the oil. I will repopulate the land, and I will show warmth to Lo Ruchama, not pitied, not loved. And Lo Ami, not my people, will become my people, and I will become their God. Compare St. John, Thomas in St. John's Gospel. My Lord and my God, the great recognition. So that's all. I just want to say two more things. Thank you for listening to me. Two more things about this marriage idea. Do you think it stopped? No, it didn't stop. If you look at the book of Proverbs, God is in heaven and he has somebody with him who's always with him. And it's a woman, it's a female. And her name is Chokmah, wisdom. Hagia Sophia, holy wisdom. Holy wisdom is a companion of God. I was there, she says. I was there when he made the world. I was there when he formed the mountains. I was an Amun, I was an architect. She would recognize an architect's work in this place. She was an architect of God's creation, a woman beside God. She also appears as a woman in Proverbs who invites young men into association with her. She invites young men to study her and to become wise and to be at one with her. And she's opposed to the other woman in Proverbs who is what we call in English a tart, meaning a woman who entices men into unwise sexual relationships with her. So there's another. So that's that. And then finally, the Song of Songs, love poetry, real love, proper love poetry. You can't read the Song of Songs. You have to extinguish cigarettes and fasten safety belts before you read the Song of Songs, because it's passionate love poetry. I won't go into the details, but in the Hebrew, you get a few tips there. And I was told as a young theological student, this is a poem about the love of God for his people. And I had a lot of testosterone buzzing around me in those days. And I said, come on, I can't believe that. This is love poetry. I know what this is all about. It's all about sex. And now I'm an old man. I think I was wrong. I think it's perfect. I think it's absolutely wonderful that the love of God is seen in the context of the consummation of a beautiful human love. I think that's a terrific insight. So there you too have a survival of this, coming right the way back to the contilit adjrude crudity to something sublimely beautiful. So from shock to awe and to worship, from shock to awe to worship. Terrific. And the Book of Common Prayer of the Church of England of 15th, 16th century says that marriage, Christian marriage, is such an excellent mystery or sacrament, that in it is signified and represented the mystical union that is betwixt Christ and his church. There, it survived right up to our times. Marriage of a man and a woman is a sacrament of God's love. Thank you.
Haya, the come alongside.
Yeah.
Do you see any relationship between that and the Greek of the parakletos?
I do. Whoever wrote that, yay.
I wrote that.
And he hasn't paid me a penny for that.
Yeah, okay.
How are we to understand Hosea 13:14's phrase, compassion is hidden from my eyes, as it relates to the preceding phrases about victory over death from that same verse? and how Paul quotes it in 1 Corinthians 15, 54 and 55.
Well, I think the answer is that God, like us, gets angry, and then he especially, and much more than we do, he calms down. Okay? And the old King James Bible used to say that God repented of the evil. So compassion is hidden from my eyes. You're so awful that I can't go on pitying you. I can't. But he can and does.
You mentioned the etymology of checkmate being traced to Shah Mot.
Yeah.
If Mot is Semitic and Shah is Persian, what language would have used cognates of both these words in conjunction?
Persian, I think.
Yeah, I think
it's Persian. But there's an overlap between Persian and Arabic.
Yeah, and chess is a Persian game originally, but they certainly had Arabic tongues around at the time. Lifetime member of the U.S. Chess Federation, I'm just saying. Okay, we've got a ton of these. I don't know how to begin. Okay, I'm asking this one. What path should I take to get where you are academically?
I would reply with a Latin tag, facilis descensus averno. The road to hell is easy.
How much of Hosea would you consider poetry? And would you consider chapter 2 the best poetry in the book?
Well, because it's good news, isn't it? That chapter 2, or that bit of it, is just such a beautiful reassertion of marriage that, all of us, we're all soppy about it. I mean, it's love, isn't it? And we are moved by love, and when it's the divine love, the movement is stronger. Yeah.
Okay. I'm so sorry to everyone who's written a lot of really good questions, but I'm really having to limit some of this because of time, and I'll try to get to some of these tomorrow in the class. But I've got limitations, and I'm sorting through trying to figure out which ones to ask. They're all really good questions. Would you elaborate, please, on the phrase that's translated, I am that I am?
Well, I think it's a puzzle. It's not easy, but it's a definition of haya, which is not to be. It's not an existential remark. It's an action remark. That's what it means. It's coming alongside. So it may mean, I am the one who comes alongside. That's my characteristic.
Okay. And I apologize to everyone because I already got to ask one of my questions, but I get to ask another one, and the rest of y'all are out of luck. So, Hosea 2. The Lord says, on that day I will attend to the heavens, and they will attend to the land. Then the land will attend to the corn, wine, and oil, and they will attend to Jezreel. Do you see in that language God saying, I will do the very things that you believe Baal and his wife do? It will come from me, who is also a God of justice and a God of equity and a God of covenant loyalty, chesed, and a God who is going to water the lands, and a God who is going to bring the corn, and a God who's doing the whole thing.
Come on up. You should bang on. Very good.
Would you join me in thanking him?